we are fighters, and we're not going to let this squashing down work.
It's just crazy. But anyway, okay. I also want to cover at the end. I'm going to write myself a note: chaos agents embedded among us. I'm going to highlight how they operate. But I'm going to save that towards the end. All right. So we are going to start off with, again, the book Twilight of the Shadow Government by Kevin Shipp, a CIA agent that the CIA tried to kill. And chapter 7 of his book, which is show number 9 for us, starts off with, and we just finished, the whole area of all of the different people that was associated with Ted Shackley and his goings on from the inside perspective of the CIA. So we're going to start with chapter 7. The name of chapter 7 is The Original Sin of Alan Dulles, Selling Drugs in the Inner City to Fight the Quote-Unquote Communist. It starts off with many Americans are aware of the fact that our intelligence agencies had alliances in the past with organized crime. They did in the CIA's campaign against Fidel Castro, and as we've proven, many others. The answer seems to be, at least in the beginning, that the mob tricked our intelligence agencies into this alliance, which of course we know not to be true. They were willing participants. It's a well-established fact that in the 1940s, the mafia had infiltrated the labor unions and controlled many of the major supports. And again, this is something that we talked about yesterday in large part. And of course, it's covered in Paul Helliwell's book, and he goes through many of the things that we've already talked about as it relates to that. So I'm going to flip through most of this just to say that the integration of the Catholic Church in these operations is also a well-established fact. And with the Catholic Church in the news, Warhamster and I have rescheduled our Vatican Bank show to Friday. We're still trying to figure out the time. So be on the lookout for that. And we know that the OSS during World War II was part of this. And that the one thing that I do want to say about the integration of the labor unions in this, it was not coincidental, and I posted about this many times, that in the National Endowment for Democracy signed into law under Reagan, as far as the creation of that particular entity, we know that these operations predate all of that. To the extent that it codified both Republican, Democrat, unions, and the Chamber of Commerce, should have been an indicator, because all of those entities are used as CIA fronts. The CIA has infiltrated the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, the unions, and the Chamber. And they do so in order to do the bidding of the international syndicate. And again, those are all points that we have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. So he just is basically showing the reader a Reader's Digest version of what we have spent over 2 years illustrating to everybody that follows Operation Gladio. He goes into the use of Chiang Kai-shek the Flying Tigers, the Civil Air Transport, CAT, which turned into Air America. He makes mention of Paul Helliwell again, and that they used the fight, quote unquote, against the communists, much like they did in Europe in the Pacific, and that the nationalist, the Chinese nationalist under the command of Chiang Kai shek, was the creation of the Golden Triangle and how they used the drugs, the opium specifically, to create the covert operations and fund Operation Gladio. And it talks about using Asian grown drugs, Italian gangsters, and customers of America inner cities in order to fund these covert operations. And of course, we know that all to be true. They only needed two more elements to complete this picture: Nazis and Ivy Leaguers. Those were delivered by Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles might be the greatest unindicted traitor in the history of the U.S. He and his brother, John Foster Dulles, provided access to New York financial world and used the administration willingly, knowingly. The FDR administration was complicit in the setup of all of this. And that Dulles, while stationed in Switzerland, wasn't serving necessarily the president, which we know that CIA doesn't work for the United States government, and that they were pursuing their own foreign policy. Now, the book, The Blonde, what is it? I never have that book in here because I carry it around room to room with me while I'm babysitting during the day, and it gets left off wherever I last had my grandson.
The Blonde Ghost?
The Blonde Beast or something like that. The Blonde. It's talking about Nazis and the Nazi machine. That is going to be our next book, by the way, because it is fitting to illustrate what this guy is telling us firsthand happened and how we ended up at the end of World War II with the creation of the CIA. It goes into, and it points out some points that I was unaware of, like the Armenian slaughter during World War I really set the stage for how the Nazis were going to be treated in World War II. It's a phenomenal transition to illustrate just how long this has been going on and to what extent. The author goes back to the Devil's Chessboard with this quote: "There was nothing undercover about Allen Dulles' wartime exploits in Switzerland. Afterwards, he made much of his espionage adventures with a sympathetic press, of course they controlled it, and then equally credulous biographers dutifully repeating his tales. But in truth, there was little daring involved for a very simple reason. Dulles was more in step with many Nazi leaders than he was with FDR. But of course, we know that FDR was funded by the same people that funded the rise of Hitler. Dulles not only enjoyed a professional and social familiarity with many of the members of the Third Reich elite that predated the war, he shared many of these men's post-war goals. While serving in his Swiss outpost, Dulles might have been encircled by Nazi forces, but he also was surrounded by old friends, meaning the actual Nazis," unquote. While Dulles had originally been slated to go to London on behalf of the OSS, he argued with Wild Bill Donovan that him being stationed in Bern, Switzerland, the financial capital of the world, made much more sense, which of course it did, because they had to set up the apparatus for the money laundering machine that would follow. Quote, "Dulles knew many of the central players in the secretive Swiss financial milieu, because he and his brother had worked with them as clients or business partners before the war. Sullivan and Cromwell, the Dulles brothers' Wall Street firm, was at the center of an intricate international network of banks, investment firms, and industrial conglomerates that rebuilt Germany after World War I. Foster, the law firm's top executive, grew skilled at structuring the complex merry-go-round of transactions that funneled massive U.S. investment into German industrial giants like IG Farben conglomerate and Krupp Steel. The profits generated from these investments then flowed to France and Britain in the form of war reparations, and then obviously back to the US to pay off loans. The view of Dulles seems to have been that Nazism and the destruction of World War II shouldn't come between old friends, which of course they made sure it didn't. Perhaps it's unfair in retrospect to say, but Foster Dulles couldn't seem to separate himself from his old German law partners, one of which was Gerhard Westrick. And he goes on to talk about that Dulles would seem to learn the lesson that politics was too important to leave to politicians. And Dulles had hoped for an alliance with Himmler, the SS chief, and Himmler, in exchange, was more than happy to work with Dulles, as was Reinhard Gehlen. So, even with Hitler and Himmler supposedly dead, which we now know wasn't the case, the impetus for Allen Dulles to get in bed with the Nazis has been well established. In 1945, President Truman abolished the OSS, but as we know, it didn't go anywhere. There was many iterations of which ended up with the creation of the CIA, and they continued business as usual. And then, as we talked about before, the relationship with William F. Buckley Jr. and his ownership of the National Review all played a part in this. The CIA's funding mechanism was in place. So what was the goal? It was to fund an effort called Operation Gladio, a stay-behind network of personnel and ammunition in Western Europe, which of course originally was designed to fight quote-unquote communism. And in our next book, we're going to lay bare how these same people were at the heart of creating what ended up being the Cold War. So he goes on to talk about the drug sales being primarily targeted at Harlem and Black communities by the CIA and the mob, and that a stay-behind secret army was used in order to facilitate false flags and the coordination of these drug routes, which at the end of the drug routes is where, well, I can't even say at the end, the mafia was intimately involved in creating the number 4 heroin. So most of the heroin that came out of Southeast Asia was a more rudimentary quality of heroin. There were heroin labs in Southeast Asia, but they didn't produce the type of heroin that was going to be distributed in Europe and America. That's where the quote unquote pharmaceuticals that were associated with the mafia came in. And they did the extra refining to make it number 4, originally in France with the Corsican mafia. And then, as you guys all know, we've talked about that mafia is taken out and all of it's transferred down to Sicily. So, the CIA was setting itself up as an institution which was higher than the democracy they served. Well, of course, because they didn't actually serve that democracy, they served the oligarchs. And he goes on to talk about that in the West, we've been led to believe in the freedom of conscience and the freedom of speech, the freedom to pursue happiness in ways that make the most sense to us, provided that we do not harm others. We do this because we believe that we are sovereign rulers of a system of government constrained by laws, but otherwise free. We know that not to be the case. In the chapter of The Art of War called Employment of Secret Agents, Sun Tzu gives the basics of espionage as it was practiced in 400 BC by the Chinese, much as it's practiced today. He says there's 5 kinds of agents: native, inside, double, expendable, and living. Native and inside agents are similar to what we shall call agents in place. Double is a term used today and is an enemy agent who has been captured, turned around, and sent back where he came from as an agent of his captors. Expendable agents are Chinese subtle, for which we later touch upon in something called deception techniques. They are agents through which false information is leaked to the enemy. To Sun Tzu, they were expendable because the enemy will probably kill them when he finds out that their information is faulty. Living agents to Sun Tzu are later day penetration agents. They reach the enemy, get information, and manage to get back alive. As Kevin Shipp read Dulles, it becomes clear to me that he simply can't get enough of the dark arts of intelligence. In the section which follows this passage, he delights in telling the reader that the Chinese communists under Mao follow the teachings of Sun Tzu, as if that's a reason for us to adopt it as well. As I read through The Craft of Intelligence, I kept looking for any section in which Dulles might show a similar reverence for the principles of Christianity or the beliefs of the Enlightenment in the ability of humans to discern the truth through study and reflection, or the ideals of our founding fathers. That search was in vain. Dulles could easily be mistaken for Sun Tzu or Machiavelli in his outlook, but he could never be mistaken for Thomas Jefferson. But he did want to explain exactly how the CIA had been set up and why its unique structure made it superior to all other intelligence agencies. Quote, "The CIA was not patterned wholly either on the OSS or on structural plan of earlier intelligence organizations of other countries. Its broad scheme was in a sense unique in that it combined under one leadership the overt task of intelligence analysis and coordination with the work of secret intelligence operations of the various types that I shall describe. Also, the new organization was intended to fill the gaps in our existing intelligence structure without displacing or interfering with the existing intelligence units in the Department of State or Defense. At the same time, it was recognized that the State Department, heretofore largely depended on its information on the reports from diplomatic establishments abroad, the components of the Department of Defense relying mainly on attachés and other military personnel abroad, could not be expected to collect intelligence on all parts of the world that were becoming increasingly difficult to access, nor to groom a standing force of trained intelligence officers," unquote. That's what Dulles viewed the intelligence agency for. And what's interesting about this passage from Dulles himself is that he viewed the CIA's collection of intelligence to then be acted upon by the covert element of the intelligence agency as well. The problem that we've illustrated over and over and over again is because they crafted the intelligence, and I do mean sometimes out of whole cloth, to only say exactly what it was needed it to say, regardless of what the truth was, in order to justify the covert use of paramilitary organizations like Operation Gladio. That is what's problematic, because what you also find out is that same flawed, like totally bullshit intelligence not only was used to engage paramilitary, but when the paramilitary aspect of the engagement was overwhelmed by indigenous people, they would stage a false flag in order for the US military to come in and save their ass. And that piece of it required the military to not only ignore what may be differing intelligence that would indicate that not only should the CIA have never been in that place to begin with, but that the false flag, sometimes the military had intelligence that it was a false flag, that the CIA had created the circumstances that they were now going to have to go in and operate inside of. Many times they had no clue, but you can understand that the propaganda and conditioning of America to always support their military has been used against us, because the CIA crafted circumstances in which to utilize our military in order to gain the support of the American people, because they will always and have been conditioned to support our military, even when the military is doing something that they should not be doing based on faulty intelligence. That's the problem with all of this, as I see it. The CIA was unique in its combined under one leadership, the overt and the covert. In both theory and practice, this meant that those engaged in gathering and analyzing the intelligence on our enemy would also be the same ones that were planning the covert action against the group in which supposedly the intelligence had been gathered. And he goes on and explains how that's problematic, which of course we know. And he also talks about where Dulles in his book talks about the plausible deception directly in the hands of the enemy high command. Few methods beat the quote unquote accident. And by accident, he's talking about false flags. So he goes on to talk about a few examples of, like, the finding of a dead British major when there was a territorial dispute going on, and then that was used basically as a false flag. And there's no doubt in my mind, I have no evidence of the fact of this particular example, that we know that they have no trouble killing people in order to create those false flags. He goes on to say that the COVID lockdowns, being forced to stay inside away from vitamin D, social distancing, masks, dancing doctors, nurse TikToks, blah, 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 maybe not being able to do anything about the cartels at the border bringing in fentanyl and killing more than 100,000 people last year, not letting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. actually run in a Democrat primary, and denying him Secret Service protection because, after all, he only lost 2 family members under suspicious deaths. All of these things are just accidents in the definition of Alan Dulles' version of accidents. He goes on to say maybe a bird flu virus that accidentally just happens to jump to humans, a Hamas terror attack at a local shopping mall, a bunch of suspiciously well dressed white supremacists wearing masks, obviously talking about the people that we all call the Patriot Front, that we all call feds. Um, and even in 1963, the CIA was dealing with charges of elitism and all that has come to mean in today's America. This is another quote. The charge has been leveled against the CIA that it recruits almost exclusively from so called Ivy League colleges in the East, with an overtone that possibly means there's too many softies and probably too many liberals for the tough job that the CIA has to do. It is quite true that we have a considerable number of graduates from Eastern colleges. It is also true that in numbers of degrees, many of the CIA personnel have at least one. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Princeton lead the list, but they are closely followed by Chicago, Illinois, Michigan, University of California, Stanford, and MIT, unquote. I don't know how anybody can make the claim that the CIA is elitist, especially when they're scraping at the bottom of the academic barrel by hiring people from Stanford and MIT. Again, that's kind of being, he says that in a joking manner, of course. As if to prove my assertion that Dulles does not genuinely appreciate free speech in America, I offer this following curious paragraph. Quote, our founding fathers put the guarantee of freedom of press in our Bill of Rights, and it became the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall pass no laws abridging the freedoms of speech or of the press. As a result of this and other constitutional safeguards, it has generally been judged that although we have several espionage laws, we could not enact federal legislation comparable to that in effect in another great democracy, Great Britain. The British Official Secrets Act provides penalties for the unauthorized disclosure of certain specified and classified information. The British legal procedures permit prosecution against publicly disclosing classified information, unquote, which of course we do too. What can I say in response to that except for the fact that Dulles got his wish after September 11th? Again, another false flag to implement what Kevin Shipp calls state secrets privileges. A chaos to bring about control. He goes on to say that he asked us to consider the possibility that Dulles hoped to bring about in 1963 has been achieved in our current system. And he goes ahead and quotes another thing out of Dulles's book, which basically says that the leaders of the press and other news, radio, and service journals to determine to what extent there can be mutual agreement for setting up a machinery to keep the press confidentially advised as to the matters in which secrecy is essential to our security, particularly to those pertaining to military hardware and sensitive intelligence operations. So Alan Dulles is advocating that they have informants in the press, which of course we know this to be true. And he likens that back to the use of Lucky Luciano and Santo Trafficani basically being used by the CIA, telling them, quote unquote, state secrets in order for them to be able to operate loosely affiliated with the CIA, but with plausible deniability. Harry Truman, who created the CIA, came to regret his decision. I disagree with that completely, and I've told you why. They all did this knowingly. They, after the fact, like Eisenhower on his way out the door, saying, oh my gosh, look, we have a military-industrial complex. It's like, what's the guy, the little kid that had the high-waisted pants going, did I do that? That's exactly what this is. And every single one of them, after they did it, has that same type of response. Did I do that? They knowingly did it and then pretend to act like they didn't. LBJ led us into the madness of the Vietnam War and then chose not to run for a second term. Although a deeply strange individual, it seems that President Richard Nixon had a strategy to get us free from the grip of the secret government, but they brought him down in a joint CIA FBI operation called Watergate. President Carter tried to end as much of the secrecy, but of course he fell victim to the deep state himself. President Reagan, who we know brought us not only George H.W. Bush as his vice president, but Iran-Contra, the National Endowment for Democracy, open borders, and many other crazy things. George H.W. Bush, of course, being a former director of the CIA and longtime CIA asset, wanted to keep tensions high with the Iraq invasion of Kuwait. President Clinton, who followed Bush, seemed to be a slick character. With the election of George W. Bush, the September 11th attacks occur and set the CIA loose. It removed what little bit of restraint it had with the Patriot Act and FISA and everything else that was brought about. The creation, not that Bush created FEMA, but the basically reorganizing FEMA to make it look much like the Phoenix program. Barack Obama was supposed to bring hope and change, but brought more of the same, to include taking it even further with the assassination of American citizens abroad via drones. Then there was Donald Trump, who promised to drain the swamp, seemed genuine in his efforts, and learned of the duplicitous of our own government, which, of course, Kevin Shipp says he hopes he does better and can get more done during a second term, which I think he has proven that he is. Then he says, when he wrote this book, it was currently the Biden administration who championed the Fine People hoax and never met a lobbyist or a war he didn't like. He still says that he was filled with hope because he believes that there are now more people awake as to what's going on in our government. He goes on to say that he was in the CIA when the Berlin Wall came down, and I recall the shock and disbelief of those times. I had joined the CIA to fight a war I expected to last decades more, but they had already been living on borrowed time. While many credit Ronald Reagan's bold, challenging words to the Soviet Union as the reason why the USSR fell, he thinks it was an earlier event that few people have commented on. He believes that Reverend Billy Graham's visit to the Soviet Union in '82 began the fall of the regime. Hundreds of thousands of Russians turned out to listen to him, showing that even after 7 decades of communism, there was a spiritual yearning among the people. And while petty tyrants like Allen Dulles will continue to worship the writings of Sun Tzu, and the rest of the world is more interested, but the rest of the world is more interested in peace, not war. They want to raise their kids in safety and abundance. They want friendly communities. The practitioners of dark arts and of persuasion can lead people to fear and suspicion. Because that is not inherently who we are as human beings, it is difficult to live that way because what we want is sunshine and truth. I think often of the Iranian assassin who the CIA deployed him. He actually believes that our Iranian assassin that he was sent to meet with was supposed to kill him. So the second attempt on his life was him being stationed in San Antonio. I'd like to think it is because seeing me up close, realizing I had a family and how much I cared about my family, that he chose not to assassinate me. But again, he will never know. Chapter 8 goes on to talk about Project Mockingbird and how it is alive and well today. His disturbing experience, which we talked about with Bob Woodward, clearly revealed to me that CIA's Operation Mockingbird was still in operation today, just modified. The Church Committee in the Senate revealed much of the secret government and that had been set up after World War II. But of course, it left off in the 1970s when it was done. But most people today probably don't know about too much about Senator Church, who might have ended up as president if he hadn't gone after the CIA and intelligence agencies. But the fortuitous murder of a CIA station chief thousands of miles away from Washington, D.C., would blunt the most explosive findings of the Church Committee. And as you guys know, I firmly believe that that guy, just like Kevin Shipp, was assassinated in order to shut him up, as well as detract in America. Because what the CIA did immediately was to blame the Church Committee that they had exposed too much and put the agents in the field in danger. It was a narrative. They needed a dead body. He goes on to quote, in 1973, the Senate Watergate Committee investigation revealed that the executive branch had directed national intelligence agencies to carry out constitutionally questionable domestic security operations. In 1974, Pulitzer Prize winner Seymour Hersh published a front page New York Times article claiming that the CIA had been spying on anti war activists for more than a decade. Violating the agency's charter, former CIA officials and some lawmakers, including Senators William Proxmire, Proxmire, and Stuart Symington, called for a congressional inquiry, unquote. When people say to me that secrets can't be kept, part of me agrees. And then the other part says, well, sometimes they can be kept for a while. From the start of the Vietnam War in 1964 until 74, the CIA was breaking rules on domestic spying, and nobody talked about it. Many suspected it. It's important to realize that when these are secret, that's both a strength and a weakness for the agencies. Nobody will know if they're lying when they deny having engaged in this activity, but it looks suspicious when they resist even a cursory investigation or submitting to questioning under oath. This is another quote. After a meeting with President Gerald Ford and his top national security advisor, Church and Vice Chairman Tower secured from the president a pledge that the White House would cooperate with Senate investigators. Staff identified potential programs for study and began requesting documents from the intelligence agency. Though staff did not always receive the documents, they enjoyed unprecedented access to material that had never been made public. Perhaps the most well-known of these internal reports, the CIA's so-called family jewels, outline the agency's misdeeds dating back to President Eisenhower administration, unquote. In truth, the corruption would go back as far as World War II. When one asks the question, have the intelligence agencies violated the rights of Americans? It is unequivocally clear that they have. And then he goes on to quote from the Church investigation, saying that they identified a wide range of intelligence abuses by federal agencies, including the CIA, FBI, IRS, and NSA. In the course of their work, investigators identified programs that never before had been known, including NSA's Project Shamrock and Minaret programs, which monitored communications to and from the United States and shared some of the data with other intelligence agencies. Committee staff researched the FBI's long-running program of covert action designed to disrupt and discredit the activities of groups and individuals deemed a threat to social rumble, and I don't know what that is. It just completely reset itself. So again, the FBI has no charter, nor the CIA or anyone else, to monitor Americans that they deem a threat to social order. And that's all of these activities is what got us to them monitoring Christians today. That program was called COINTELPRO. The FBI included among the program's many target organizations, such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Vietnam War Movement, and individuals like Martin Luther King Jr., as well as local, state, and federal elected officials. One of Kevin Shipp's favorite expressions is you can trust your government or you can know your history, but you can't do both. When one reads a news story today suggesting some dark agenda being put forth by intelligence agencies to go after whistleblowers or those calling for greater transparency, all you have to do is look at the historic playbook that was revealed by the Church Commission. And despite all of the roadblocks that were thrown in their way, the Church Committee uncovered a great deal. And he goes on to quote some of that. Quote, after holding 126 full committee meetings, 40 subcommittee meetings, interviewing 800 witnesses in public and closed session, combing through 110,000 documents, the committee published a final report on April 29, 1976. Investigators determined that, beginning with FDR's administration and continuing right up until the commission, intelligence excesses at home and abroad were not the product of a single party, an administration, or a man, but had developed as America rose to become a superpower during the Cold War. Intelligence agencies have undermined the constitutional right of citizens, the final report concluded, primarily because checks and balances designed by the framers to ensure accountability have never been applied, unquote. If you know your history, you don't trust your government, at least not without a system of checks and balances. In 2023, two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning James Risen published a long overdue biography on Senator Frank Church called The Last Honest Man, the CIA, the FBI, and the Kennedys, and one senator's fight to save democracy. It was a New York Times bestseller. The book opens with what might have been the most dramatic moment of the hearings, the production of the heart attack gun by CIA Director William Colby. Quote, have you brought with you some of the devices that would have enabled the CIA to use this poison for killing people? Senator Frank Church, dressed in a dark brown suit and color-splashed designer tie, stares at the Senate caucus room and employing the precise dictation that his trademark questions William Colby, the director of the CIA. The subject of the hearings is an investigation into why the CIA secretly stored a cache of lethal shellfish toxin for use in assassinations, despite a presidential order to destroy it. Church has just asked Colby to show him what kind of weapon a CIA assassin would use to fire the toxin on a victim. We have indeed, replied Colby, staring unsmiling right back at Church from behind his glasses, carefully combed hair, and light tailored suit, unquote. All of the hallmark qualities of the CIA were on display at the hearing. The hearing continued, quote, Mitchell Rogovan, a dark-haired, left-leaning civil liberties lawyer hired by Colby to be special counsel to the CIA, specifically to deal with the democratically controlled Church Committee, takes out a strangely designed battery-operated pistol shaped like a .45 with a large sight attached across its barrel. He walks up to the dais and lays the gun down in front of Church. Church holds up the gun in his left hand, pointing it towards the ceiling, his finger off the trigger. John Tower, the committee's ranking Republican sitting to Church's left, stares at the gun as Church holds it aloft. News reporters kneeling in front of the committee dais quickly go to work, taking shot after shot of Church holding this heart attack gun. Unquote. The image of Church and John Tower, who would later lead the Tower Commission, which essentially absolved President Reagan of criminal undoing in the Iran-Contra affair, becomes the symbol of the Church Committee. Although Risen paints a picture of the Church Committee hearings as a righteous cause, he is even-handed in his assessment of Frank Church. Quote, the hearings showcase the two sides of Frank Church, the ambitious, publicity-seeking politician yearning for acceptance in Washington, the Frank Church who knew that holding up the dart gun would generate buzz and headlines, and the radicalized outsider who hated the Washington establishment. Frank Church, who despised the American imperialism represented by a spy agency prepared to kill foreign leaders with toxin-filled darts. I think perhaps our addiction to war in the last 30 years had something to do with CIA abuses, Church said in appearance before the Women's National Democratic Club in September 1975. We've engaged in more active warfare than any other nation in the world, and that has a certain brutalizing effect, unquote. For many of us, the 1970s doesn't seem so distant, and yet for some, it will appear almost like ancient history. But the concerns of Frank Church, as the country was emerging from the shadows of Vietnam, do not seem so different from where we're at today, with Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, the Middle East, and Taiwan, which of course it wouldn't, because all of those start from the same starting point. You cannot divorce World War II in the aftermath on any of the current situation, and we've explained why repeatedly. So, he goes on with a quote, by 1975, Frank Church had come to believe that the future of American democracy was threatened by the rise of a permanent and largely unaccountable national security state, and he sensed that at the heart of that secret government was a lawless intelligence community. In order to save the nation, Church was convinced America's spy agency would have to be reined in, unquote. My assessment is it has to be shattered and completely done away with, because they do not gather intelligence, and what they exclusively do is covert action, and not for the American government, but for a criminal international syndicate. Then he talks about, then came the murder in December 1975 of the CIA station chief in Greece, and blame quickly became attached to the Senator Church hearing committee. Here's a quote. On the night of December 23rd, 1975, Ron Estes, E-S-T-E-S, the CIA's deputy station chief in Athens, was lounging on the couch in his girlfriend's apartment when a Greek driver for Richard Welch, the CIA station chief, busted in the front door and yelled, "A shooting, and Mr. Welch is down." Estes grabbed his coat and ran out with the driver while his girlfriend yelled at him not to go. When he got to Welch's house, Estes found a 46-year-old station chief lying on the sidewalk on his back, and his wife, Kita, kneeling beside him. Blood covered Welch's face. Estes could see immediately that his boss was dead. "I didn't need to feel for a pulse," said Estes. And Richard Welch, is the CIA agent that was sacrificed in order to derail the Church Commission and accountability. And way back, like 2 years ago, we covered this part in depth. There was all kinds of crap going on in Greece at the time. The British had a female agent there, an MI6 agent, that was part and parcel of an entire scheme, for lack of a better word, that was going on. And basically, Welch was sacrificed. You can't draw, if you actually go in depth and research it, you can't draw any other conclusion because of all of the parties that were there and how the whole thing got set up. Mr. Welch was returning from a party given by the U.S. Ambassador Jack Kubich, Kubisch, when 3 gunmen shot him in the street outside his home in a wealthy suburb. Some weeks earlier, Greek and American journals had identified him as the head of the CIA operation here, and supporters of the agency accused its critics of fingering agents and endangering their lives. The outcry that followed the Welch murder helped sidetrack the investigations into the CIA, then taking place in Congress. Some critics accuse the agency of having distorted and exploited the Welch case in order to squash the congressional inquiries. I go a little bit further. Who would be leading the charge on behalf of the CIA against the Church Committee questions, blaming Church personally for the Welch murder? That would be none other than George H.W. Bush, then the director of the CIA, whom Church was vehemently opposed to. Quote, Frank Church was stunned by the sudden reversal of the political climate in the wake of Richard Welch's murder. In early 1976, Church had to navigate through the Pike committees, an inquiry in the House, epic flameout, and also deal with more confrontational CIA under the leadership of George Bush. During one closed hearing of the Church Committee, Bush blurted out, "You were responsible for Welch's assassination." It pissed off everybody. We forced Bush to apologize during that hearing. Bush is projecting onto Church what he himself did. One gets the sense that if the CIA wanted to assassinate you, they might very well use a poison dart gun. Or if that might attract too much attention, there's always character assassination that can be pulled off behind a closed-door Senate hearing. It's probably a good way to get the independent-minded senators singing on the same sheet of music. You know, scare them. And who might have been at Bush's side at the meeting, whispering in his ear? Some evidence suggests it was none other than William Barr, the 2-time Attorney General. When Barr was nominated in 2019 to be Trump's Attorney General, CNN did a piece on Barr titled, "What Barr's Work Under Bush 41 Tells Us About How He'll Handle His New Job." In a surprising move, Barr was quite open about his CIA background. Quote, Barr first met Bush in the 70s when both men worked for the CIA, Barr beginning his career in Washington as a junior officer at the agency and Bush being its director. In 2001 interview with Miller Center, Barr described one of his first interactions as Bush was quizzed at a congressional oversight hearing. He leaned back and said, "How the hell do I answer this one?" Barr recalled. "I whispered the answer in his ear and he gave it. And I thought, who is this guy? He listens to legal advice when it's given." In a statement to CNN, Barr called Bush a great man by every measure and a gentleman of the old school kind, considerate and decent, unquote. I think it's important for the reader to put themselves in the shoe of the CIA director and ask yourself a couple of questions. If I was going to secretly run a country, how would I do it? My answer is to have somebody on my side that nobody would expect, like maybe a 2-time Attorney General who, with his roly-poly, grumpled academic fat cat face, looks about as far removed as being a secret agent as humanly possible. And if you know where to look, such as Vanity Fair's profile on Bill Barr in 2019, you can find support for that idea. Quote, at one point, the young Barr even declared to Horace Mann, advisor, that he grew up wanting to be the head of the CIA. Soon after graduation, Barr joined the CIA as a China analyst while attending George Washington University Law at night and married Christine Moynihan, a librarian. According to James Zarin, the legal commentator and former federal prosecutor, Barr is from the school of some French word, I am the state, unquote. In his mind, Barr may have considered himself the state within a few years of joining the agency to be able to whisper answers into the ear of the CIA director and to have his words repeated verbatim was an excellent addition to his resume. With Barr on attack, church situation continued to worsen. And they talk about the Johnny Roselli's grisly murder was added to the postscript of the church committee. And that came on the heels of the death of Sam Giancana and Orlando Lettier, who, as we know, was the ambassador from Chile that was assassinated by the CIA's Cuban exile group in Washington, D.C. So if you don't think that the CIA is sending a signal to the people in Congress, you're deaf, dumb, and blind. 2 days after Roselli's body was found, Senator Howard Baker called for both the CIA and FBI to provide any information they had on Roselli's murder. There appears to be a connection between Roselli and Giancana's murder, Baker told reporters. Both agreed to testify on the same subject, and both ended up assassinated. That's not even throwing in the death of Dorothy Hunt, obviously E. Howard Hunt's wife, who we found out was assassinated when they took down an aircraft and everyone on board. Or the killing of the CIA station chief at the same time. That's 5 deaths of people connected to the CIA dirty tricks, and not a single person was ever convicted. That's not true. Lettier's person was convicted, and they ended up being Cuban exiles, which are CIA assassins. So, crazy. And then it says, one person who found these events highly disturbing was Senator Gary Hart. Gosh, whatever happened to him? Oh, they got rid of him too. Not like physically killed him, they just set him up. Gary Hart took the murder of Johnny Roselli harder than any other member of the church committee. He believed that it was crucial to find out whether Roselli had been murdered because of the church committee testimony, especially after Sam Giancana. Hold on, they just took out Bridget. Let me bring her back up. Especially after Sam Giancana had been murdered right before he was scheduled to testify. Hart was shocked that no federal agency seemed interested at all in Roselli's murder. Not the FBI, not the CIA, no one. It seemed pretty obvious to me that Roselli was killed because of his testimony before the committee. Same with Giancana. To me, it set off all kinds of warning signals and red lights. I just assumed that people would jump all over it. The FBI, the CIA, nope, nothing. But of course, with the George H.W. Bush being in charge of the CIA, that was not going to happen. Bill Barr would have us believe George H.W. Bush was a gentleman. That's how he wants history to be written. However, it's difficult to reconcile Barr's picture of the same man who in private session accused a sitting senator of the death of a CIA officer that had nothing to do with him. But it was sending a clear picture that we will set your ass up if you try to hold us accountable. And then people wonder today why Congress won't hold the CIA accountable. That's not even mentioning Congressman Leo Ryan, who they actually assassinated in Guyana. The church presidential campaign suffered from 2 defects. His tenure on the church committee after the killing of CIA station chief Richard Welch made him a pariah. And second, he entered the race too late. But even with those 2 problems, there were significant betrayals. And I can't wait to quote this next section. Quote, even Senator Joe Biden, who Frank Church had helped by lending him staff during his 1972 campaign, and then helped him again after his wife and daughter was killed in a car crash just after his election to the Senate, snubbed Church and went with Carter. Biden became chairman of Jimmy Carter's National Steering Committee during the Democrat primary season. Biden's move to Carter was just one of the many signs that influential Democrats was not waiting around for Frank Church to finally get in the race. I think that hurt Church. When Biden endorsed Carter, recalled Susan Hunter, who worked on the Church campaign and later in his Senate office, Biden told reporters that Carter appealed to him because he was running a campaign based on personal integrity rather than political issues. That was a pointed rebuke of Frank Church, unquote. You always kind of had to suspect that Joe Biden would be somewhere in the picture, didn't you? The hale and hearty joking guy ready to stab you in the back, right? Don't vote for Carter, Biden seemed to be saying in 1976 because he's got the right. Don't vote for Carter, Biden seemed to be saying in 76 because he's got the right policies. Vote for him because he's not the other guy, meaning Frank Church. So that's crazy. Senator Frank Church lost his Senate election in 1980 to Republican Steve Sims. Many of his fellow liberals also lost their races in the Reagan landslide. The CIA took note. Winston Churchill once said that a man is known by his enemies. If we judge Church by his enemies in the CIA, we may see him as a completely different person. In 1984, Church was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he would die within a year. He went out swinging at the shadow government. Quote, but even as he was facing death, Church continued to sound the same alarm that he had become his hallmark. In one of his last interviews in January 1984, Church warned again about the threat to American imperialism, now embodied by Ronald Reagan. We seem unable to learn about the failures of our Vietnam policy or the equally evident failure of our hardline policy with Castro in Cuba, Church told David Broder of the Washington Post. It is this idea that the communist threat is everywhere that has made our government its captive and its victim. This country has become so conservative, so fearful, that we have come to see revolution anywhere in the world as a threat to the United States. It's nonsense. And yet the policy we have followed has cost so many lives, so much treasure, such setback to our vital interests. As a great power, we ought not to be able to endure it. So, although the players change, the game stays the same. And he goes on to talk about the propaganda that was associated around all of these things, and talks about an article written by David Barstow entitled Behind TV Analyst, Pentagon's Hidden Hand. And then it's talking about in 2005, the Bush administration and the controversy over Guantanamo Bay. He talks about examples in Afghanistan, basically giving you an updated version of a whole bunch of examples of the Mockingbird media that a lot of people tend to associate only with the 60s and 70s. But he clearly articulates the fact that it is still going strong. He talks about the most recent things with Facebook and Twitter and all of those. So he's definitely well in tune with kind of history and the current events as they're happening. He talks about companies like PayPal, Amazon Web Service, GoDaddy, and all of those being involved in the modern day propaganda machine. He even quotes Zero's Hedge article where they talk about Christopher Steele and his creation of the dossier. So again, I'm not going to go into depth in these parts. I want you to understand this guy sees things very clearly as far as what the CIA's hand is in all of this. And he does a good job of articulating exactly what it is. He talks about Obama creating the policies that basically avoided any trouble with the intelligence agencies because he basically was a rubber stamp for everything that they wanted to do, including eventually by the time they got around to taking out bin Laden, which of course was their asset, and the use of the FISA court illegally doing all of the shit that they did in the targeting of Trump. So that brings us to chapter 9, and we're going to stop there. And we will resume tomorrow on that chapter. So, oh, dang. Right at an hour. Awesome. Okay. The floor is open. Where did Bridget go? They keep busting her down. I got you, girl. SR 71.
Afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Colonel, and thank everybody for attending and everybody on Rumble as well. I don't know how you did it to get an hour on a mark, Colonel, but you did it.
Very close.
That said, we're going through all of this, and we're listening to all of this in Kevin Shipp's recollections, and I'm assuming that at some given point in time, he was actually part of what was going on. And understanding that and seeing that and then hearing that from him, what I don't quite understand yet, and I'm hoping we're going to get it, is there's still declassified that can validate some of his claims. Specifically, I would think with the church committee and how Gary Hart took it and what Gary Hart did with it. We know how Gary Hart lost his whole presidential bid in the scandal, but that aspect of it just blows my mind.
So none of the Gary Hart's association with it, I mean, the statements that he made and everything, that's all public knowledge. I mean, that was quotes from newspaper articles. Gary Hart very much was calling into question all of that, and that's not classified. What is classified is they're setting him up. And I think that if you went back and started pulling the information about his alleged affair, and you start doing now with our Gladio glasses on, looking at the people that were involved and who were writing the stories, you're going to find all of the smoking guns. I did not do that. I didn't have time to do that. But I'm sure that that's somewhere, and it was probably an operation inside of the CIA. And it would be a great dig for somebody to go and do, because they penalize anybody that speaks out against them. And I thought it was interesting that you see exactly the makings at the very beginning of Joe Biden becoming a senator, how he basically jumped on anybody's bandwagon that was the least controversial. He had no ethics. He had no stance on anything. He was Johnny come lately to anybody that he felt was going to be able to rise his boat a little bit. So, all along.
Just picking up on that a little bit. It seems like how important it is,
Hey, all along.
Yeah.
There's a lot of background noise. We cannot hear your voice because of it.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but I can't understand what you're saying because of the background noise.
All right, I'll try to talk later.
Okay.
Better environs.
Okay. Miles, go ahead.
Bridget, I was in the garage, so I lost connection. Thanks for sending me a link. Colonel, this may be a stretch, but I have a chain of command question. So during World War II, there was the Army Air Corps, and we know the Marines came out of the Navy. And I'm wondering why they took the Army Air Corps away from the Army and it went to the Air Force. And this is around the same time that we're dealing with the international syndicate. Were they trying to do something to the executive branch for the president not to have certain authority over the military? And has that been fixed?
So the Marines didn't come out of the Navy. The Marines were around a lot longer than the Navy. The Marines are there. When they reorganized, the Marines were put under the Navy at some point in time. The reason the Air Force was birthed in the post-World War II era, if you go back and read the history, and a lot of the testimony was the amazing amount of air power and how it was used during World War II, spoke highly of the fact that it was the future of warfare, and that having all of the Army generals, which are all ground pounders, in charge of air would only allow the air to be exploited as it supports ground troops and never as a strategic element of global power. And the people advocating for the Air Force to be its own separate branch of the service saw the future of air operations as strategic, not tactical. And let me explain the difference. In warfare, you have three levels of engagement. You have strategic, operational, and tactical. And tactical air support, like attack aircraft like the A-10s, is very different than strategic use like in the B-52s. And the operational level of warfare would be the use of fighter aircraft. Now, had the air component been allowed to remain under Army, and I know this firsthand having worked on the budget at the Pentagon for 2 years, the Army thinks only of tanks and guns. They talk about very tactical level operations. Not that they don't have operational and strategic elements themselves. The Army even had a space command. But again, it's focused on ground pounders. It's taking objectives. What's over the next hill? That type of thing. Where the Air Force and what was coming from the air component of World War II was far around across the horizon that could be, it's basically one-dimensional warfare versus three-dimensional warfare. And the ability to orchestrate an air campaign being subordinate only to Army senior officers limited its ability to do everything that it could do. And there was a decision made post-World War II that it needed to have its own service, just like Trump did by creating Space Force, because we are now at the point where even within the Air Force that has a very strategic view, their use of Space Command within the Air Force. So the Air Force had a Space Command. But again, who's in charge of the Air Force? Fighter pilots, for the most part. Are fighter pilots the best people to orchestrate the strategic use of space assets across an entire spectrum of warfare. No, they're not. And so by having its own service, it allows an equal footing for the next generation, and call that four-dimensional warfare using space, in order to come up with a cohesive, full spectrum use of lethality. So that in no way changes the chain of command. The components of the services all still report to the Secretary of Defense, and he reports to the president. So, no, there was no thought that you were usurping the chain of command or anything else. It was basically putting an emphasis on what is going to be the next generational capability of warfare, and to be able to leverage the resources in the best way possible. So if you could imagine a conference table where you would have only had the Navy and the Army, because that's the secretariat level. The Marines, being subordinate to the Navy, didn't have a seat at the secretary table. And so you have the Navy and you have the Army, and had the air component be left within the Army, you would have never had the president being advised on strategic air. And that would have significantly thwarted anything that would have been developmental out of the Air Force, because they would have funded tanks before they funded B-52s. They would have funded tanks before they funded fighters. They may have funded the A-10s, because, again, that's direct air support of ground pounders, but they were not going to necessarily give the same emphasis to a new technology at the time, which was the full capability use of the air. Does that make sense?
Well, I think I asked the right person the question. What about the Coast Guard?
The Coast Guard is completely different. The Coast Guard, very interestingly, having been housed in the Department of Transportation and now Homeland Security, is unlike anything that you've ever seen. When I first started working with the Coast Guard, when I was on a joint task force to integrate service computer systems for personnel purposes, I was fascinated by what the Coast Guard's mission is. The Coast Guard is basically an international militarized police force. They have arrest authority over anybody, anywhere on the entire globe. So at CENTCOM, our Coast Guard, so Central Command, I was stationed there over 9/11. On every mission that you had the possibility of needing to arrest someone, the Coast Guard had a contingent among the forces, because they have global arrest authority. No military person has that authority. Not a four-star general, not a major, not an NCO. The Coast Guard can arrest anybody, anywhere. And that was fascinating to me. They basically function as one of the only international bodies that have that jurisdictional authority. So,
You mean even politicians on a yacht? Oh my God.
even politicians on a yacht. Adam, go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. How you doing, Colonel? I hope everything's all well. Happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank
and
you.
Everybody else, hope you had a great one.
I did.
Good to hear. Space Force, people think Space Force is just like space. No, I'm not saying you, of course, but, just generally speaking, space also includes cyberspace. In 2022, they took over all military communications. So like any comms, it's just like really, you got to think it's not just Space Force, it's cyberspace included. So that's where I think they do play an important role in all this, gathering data, things like that. So it's kind of interesting. I just wanted to, bring up that point there that it's not just space, like outer space, it's cyberspace as well.
So, and you bring up an interesting point. Most people don't understand how all of the chain of command, the way the military. So let me give you an example. If you had a, and I'm just going to make shit up, so you'll understand what I'm going to say in a minute. If you had a company that basically was an employment agency and they specialized in, let's just say, electricians, and no one else had any electricians employed in the company. They borrowed electricians from this electrician provider service, like an HR company. And they were matrixed into on temporary duty into these companies in order to do electrical work. And then they returned to the mothership of electrical people. And the only time that they were employed outside of the mothership was on a matrix kind of loaned setup. So if you look at the US military, the Secretary of Defense, all of that, you have services like the Air Force, Space Force, Army, Navy, which houses the Marines. They train and equip their people in order to be matrixed to a completely different organizational structure. So if I'm in the Air Force and I'm assigned to an Air Force base, I'm doing training and equipping to be matrixed into a completely different organization to go ply my trade, so to speak, in one of those other organizations. So let's skip that. Let's just hold on to that concept. Everybody is assigned to a service. When you go and look at the actual operational command, like how we go to war, we have war fighting capability. In that war fighter capability, you have US. So I'm talking not Space Command, but you will have a unified command, which means anybody can be assigned to it of all services. There is a US Space Command. There is a warfighting command that is US Central Command. There is US Africa Command. There is US European Command, EUCOM. There is US PACCOM. And those are the war fighters. So a thing that flares up like 9/11, we're going to go to war. U.S. Central Command is the war fighter over the geographical region. Every one of the whole globe is divided into geographical regions, and there is a war fighter assigned to every inch of the globe. Then we have a handful that are not isolated to a geographical region. They deal with special things like SOCOM, Special Operations Command. Special Operations Command has under every geographical command, like CENTCOM, what they call a SOC, a Special Operations Command. So SOC CENT reports to the 4-star and goes with them everywhere they go to do anything. So we had, and they require very specialized training because they do special operations. We also had a representative of space in CENTCOM. You have a representative of another one of those specialty commands is TRANSCOM. They handle all global transportation. And so you have a geographical, what they call SINCs, commander in charge. And you also have functional unified commands, which is like TRANSCOM, SpaceCom, Cyber Command, because their specialty is used by everybody. So at a geographical command, you will have a representative from all of the functional commands. And in most cases, you will have an element like there are these specialized units that deal just with transportation that are deployed to a geographical sink that has a tether back to Transcom at St. Louis at Scott Air Force Base. And they work as the forward deployed Transcom element supporting like CENTCOM after 9/11. There will be a cyber deployable unit that goes and supports CENTCOM. There is the SOC that is dedicated, the Special Operations Command, SOC CENT, that goes forward and supports that warfighter. And those are operational commands. Those are completely different from your services. The services are only to train and equip people to go work for warfighters. And so you can think of the Air Force, the Space Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, all of them are force providers. And the war fighters like CENTCOM, PACOM, AFRICOM, UCOM, those guys are all the boots on the ground, go kick ass, blah, blah, blah. Those are two completely separate entities. SR 71.
Thank you for all that explanation, Colonel. I did want to add a bit since you were talking about the Air Force earlier and designation of aircraft. The designation of aircraft, for those that don't know, there's a letter designated in front of the aircraft to begin with, followed by a number. And that letter designates what kind of aircraft you're looking at, whether it's an attack, whether it's a fighter, whether it's
bomber,
J, or whether it's a bomber, exactly. And it's typically followed by a number and maybe followed by a letter, which is an iteration of that specific aircraft. And that iteration can go on forever, but they skip the letters India and Oscar in the alphabet simply because they don't want people to get confused with 1 and 0.
That's true. And basically the letter designator at the end is the improvement iteration. So like you had the C-130, which is cargo for C-130, and then like the E models were obviously the next iteration, the F model, G model, blah, blah, blah. The same is true. Any major change to the makeup of the aircraft, but still a C-130, is going to have a new letter identifier at the end. So just so that you know that. Okay, so if I don't have any more questions about any of that stuff, I do want to talk about chaos agents among us. You guys are very familiar with chaos agents that are on X, and their entire profile is to say outrageously crazy things in order to get clicks. And a lot of them are paid to do that. They're very obvious when they do it. But I want to talk about the embedding of chaos agents in local groups. You guys know I don't just come on X and talk about crap, our history. I also engage locally. I go out and I give, I meet with conservative groups all over my area. I've helped people with campaigns, and I don't normally talk about that type of thing on here. But I do want to bring up something, and I'm going to talk as generically as I can for several reasons. But recently, you guys know that I host a lot of gatherings, and we had someone take someone out of a group. They didn't call the person. And it was based on some information that they believed to be true because they heard it from someone. They didn't call the individual that's been a part of our group since the beginning. And that created chaos. The person wanted to know why they had been excluded from the group. And I inserted myself into it and basically said that if that person is not welcome in this group, I don't want to have anything to do with the group. And then once I found out that they had made assumptions about the person and had never even called them to address it before excluding them from this group, which, by the way, the person that excluded them runs a Telegram message board for this group. They're not in charge of the group. Me and two of my friends are. And the exclusion of this person was done without any of us knowing about it. And you guys know that I don't put up with drama. I am like the least drama person in the world. If you create drama, you're blocked. I also want to disclose something else. You guys that have been with me for a long time know that we had, and I don't care that I name names. The woman that was in here that is Sally. So she came in very complimentary, like overtly so, and was part of our group and participated in many of our initial shows. Great. Bridget and Cousin It and I, talking off the show, thought it was really weird just because of how overtly complimentary. Most people aren't like that. Most people will come in and say stuff and, like Stellar does, complimentary, but not like dripping with that sugar sweet to the point where it's false. And we noticed that every time she came into our space, there were tons and tons of bots that would come up, and you guys saw some of them. They would come up and they would start screaming. Well, when she got blocked, that all went away. We didn't have them anymore. And behind the scenes, and I think I've mentioned this to you, what was that girl's name most recently, Bridget? I can't remember her name. Charlie. Okay, so Charlie shows up. Charlie had a group that you could go and advertise your spaces. And when Charlie, who is a friend of Sally's, DM'd me and said, hey, we've got this thing. I'd like to invite you to it. It's just strictly for advertising your spaces so we all know who's having spaces and can deconflict. And I'm like, well, that's a great idea. The more the merrier as far as getting word out about Operation Gladio. But again, some red flags started happening. One of which was one of the very first things she said after I joined that group DM to advertise our space in. She tells me that I need to unblock Sally. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. And so I didn't hear any more about that. And then Cousin It, who had blocked Sally, or Charlie, came up and was a co-host because we needed her to be a co-host. She had blocked Charlie, so Charlie couldn't get in that day. Charlie comes into my DMs and basically tells me that I have to tell Cousin It to unblock her, which I refuse to do because I don't dictate to anybody what they have to do. And then tells me that I'm not allowed to use the DM spaces until I do. And I'm like, fuck you. You don't tell me what to do. I don't tell other people what to do. And not only am I leaving your space because it's stupid, but I'm also blocking you too. So then immediately someone else contacts me a fellow colonel and advocate on behalf of Charlie and suggest to me that I need to unblock her. And I said, not only am I not going to unblock her, I'm insulted that you even approached me on behalf of someone else without asking me why I blocked her in the beginning. But when you stand on principle, there's no other wiggle room for how things happen. So just so that you know, this person, this colonel, DM'd me in the last couple of days and told me that I was right about Charlie. I don't know what happened and I don't care. Because again, I'm not into the drama, don't give a shit. But there are people being sent into our spaces that I don't know why, but when you see them, because I'm not going to get caught up in the drama that sinks a lot of other people, I block them. And I want you guys to understand that this kind of stuff is going on behind the scenes. It's not only going on behind the scenes on X, it is going on in people's real life outside of X when you're trying your best to spread the word of the corruption of our government. And I don't tolerate it on any level. So, just so that you guys know that. Not that I think that that applies to any of you. I want you to know that it's going on. And also, before we move on, and I will get to the other hands, I want to say this. For those of you who've asked me, and several of you have, I'm going to take 2 trips this summer, one of which is to Texas, and the other one is to West Virginia. Those are kind of the final destinations of both of those. And I'm going in a circuitous route to have the pleasure of experiencing our country because I love it. We're going in our RV. So I am not going to tell you the dates of when I'm going to be there live on this show. But if you live in a comfortable driving distance of any of these locations, please DM me. I have open DMs. And if you have a group of people that you would like to invite me to talk to, I would gladly do that. I'm just going to tell you in not any order of when I'm going, what areas I'm going to be in. One of which is Montgomery, Alabama. And yes, I am going to Air University now that I know my alma mater, where I went to Air War College. And I am going to be on a specific mission of visiting the library there that I spent hours and hours in, not knowing anything about Gladio, to see what I can find about Gladio in that library, to see if they have anything at all, because now I'm genuinely curious. The second one is Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I am going to be at around Shreveport, Louisiana, in Barksdale Air Force Base. Again, I have a mission that I'm going to be on while I'm there. And I am going to the change of command of one of the, he just recently pinned on Colonel. He is taking group command at Fort Hood. He is an Air Force officer. He does the surface warfare, calling in air support to Army units. So he will be stationed at Fort Hood. So I will be in and around Fort Hood for a few days. I will be in and around Austin, Texas, which is where my daughter lives. And then I am going to be at one of my favorite places in the whole wide world, Ocean Springs, Mississippi, visiting friends. And I will be at Orange Beach, Alabama for a few days. And then I'm going to return home. So that's the first trip. I have all of those dates locked in. And I will be putting the second trip, which will include Nashville, West Virginia, the western part of West Virginia, a few days outside of Columbus, Ohio, and that's pretty much the areas that I've got nailed down for the second trip. And that will be in August sometime. So,
Did you say Nashville?
yes, I did say Nashville. Yeah, that's not too far from you.
Road trip.
I
Road
know.
trip.
Yeah. So, yeah, you definitely need to come to that. And I'll get you the dates off camera. Okay, SR 71, what you got?
All I can say, Colonel, is enjoy your trip, because those are my kind of trips. Going across the U.S., stopping where I want to, doing whatever I want to, whatever suits my mind at that point in time.
Yeah.
After 3 about o'clock.
And the best part, yeah, the best part of it is I take my Starlink with me so I can stay in communication with all of you guys. So, I don't know who was first. All along, go ahead.
All right, Colonel, I hope one day you'll make it up here to Gillibrand's Island, where the most articulate speaker is Congressman Gerald Nadler's the Penn's undergarments, because we could use some fresh discourse up here. But I just wanted to comment on your remark about Joe Biden's background. I think one of the things I've noticed is over the last 6-8 years is, just how much censorship there was about Biden's background, and especially in places where one would expect that the purported left would be kind of persistent about exposing the reality of just how conformist, what the media calls centrist, but it's actually, in my opinion, more accurately described as corporate rightists, not cultural rightists. Some may disagree.
No, I agree completely.
Because, they, especially on the so-called left, what folks don't realize is, like, this is how the CIA thinks, in my opinion. I could be wrong. If you're dialing into a media site and you're like expecting, oh, this is the harshest criticism that's rational of Joe Biden I'm going to hear, and CIA can turn that 9 or 10 volume down to a 6 because of its position as, oh, you enter, going to Counterpunch or one of these controlled left sites, thinking, well, this is as bad as it gets for Joe Biden because they're his harshest critics, but they only throw on a 6 volume instead of a 9 or a 10 volume, which is, connecting all of the dots of his, corporate CIA essence. Then who wins? CIA wins. Even if it's a 6, that's going to interact with everything else and say, it'll end up, well, is that all there is for the entire political spectrum? They play that game, and we kind of know it, but it's important to bear in mind, just how much of Joe Biden's past was completely erased in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I forgot what else I was going to say, but anyway.
Okay.
Look forward to have fun on your trip.
Thank you. So I want to shout out to Fergie62 over on Rumble. She gave us a Rumble rant and basically said that Rumble is performing much better today than it has the last couple of days. And also, Donnie Vision said was gifted a membership by Fergie62. So Fergie, thank you so much. You are awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Patrick, go ahead. Patrick Jonas. Nothing? May need to turn your mic on. We can't hear you. Okay. Miles?
It's funny that groups were brought up today, because I was contacted earlier this morning, to join a group. I don't know why anybody would want me in a group, but it's on a specific topic. And since we're naming names, it was Ron Pertain and Alpha Warrior who want me to join a group. Now, they're going to be running it, so I'm not going to say what it's about until I talk to them. So,
well, those two people are truly patriots, and I would join any group that they're a part of, just for my 2 cents. Tim, and then Dante.
Hey, Colonel, we talked about it before, but if you're heading north up 95, you're welcome to the dock at my place here in Richmond Hill.
Okay, I'm coming back that way, and so we will definitely stay in touch.
Okay, good.
On trip 2.
Trip 2. Well, I mean, we're home all the time.
Okay, all right.
I'm easy to get. All we do is work at home.
Okay.
Look at the river. Hey, how does Gladio tie into the decoupling of the U.S.-Israeli relationship? Seems to be going on right now.
That's probably an entire show. But understand that Israel, Mossad's intelligence apparatus, with the CIA, both of which are post-World War II intelligence agencies, has worked hand in hand. And I have articulated multiple times how Israel has stepped in as the weapons trafficker for many of these operations, whether it was the Iran-Contra 1 and 2, or our attack on Angola, where they trafficked weapons into South Africa and then into Angola. So the connection between intelligence agencies and the state itself are intricately linked, as it is with MI6, the German BND, blah, blah, blah. And so the decoupling of all of these is intricate to isolating these intelligence functions in order to choke them into non-existence. So it is a necessary step. Dante, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, sorry, I missed the part about Biden. I didn't realize you were going off on him today, but Biden's interesting. So if you want to understand just how he's operated, you have to look at Mel Monzak, his old partner over there. Mel Monzak is the guy who has had his power of attorney since I believe it was 87, but Mel Monzak's wife, even prior to that, was a Biden staffer back in the early 80s, because Monzak and Biden go all the way back to the days before Biden was even really in the Senate. They were old law partners together. But you fast forward, you got this information coming out about Reid Hoffman and Smartmatic, which is just effectively a tool that the CIA, the NED, and all those guys had used to effectuate regime change, starting down in Venezuela, but arguably even before. But with that, just to show you just kind of how rigged the game was with Biden, his daughter, Nina Monzak, was the clerk for Judge Eric Davis, who was a presiding judge in the in the Smartmatic versus News Corp and versus OAN Newsmax lawsuit. That was Mel Monzak. Think about that for a second. The daughter of the guy who held Joe Biden's power of attorney was just randomly selected, appointed to be the clerk of the judge in the presiding case surrounding the coup of 2020. And now we're finding out Reid Hoffman, even before then, showed up and just magically appeared on the set with $24 million for Smartmatic. Pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, just a food for thought, girl.
So the reason Joe Biden came up today is we were going over Kevin Shipp's book, and he was talking about the Eric Church Committee and how I added a whole bunch of it, but the Eric Church Committee, as well as the Pike Commission, as you're well aware, was basically at its conclusion derailed because of the assassination of the CIA station chief in Greece, which at the very beginning 2 years ago, I did an entire deep dive on that assassination, and it basically was the CIA taking out one of its own, which of course they tried to do with Kevin Shipp as well. Irony upon irony, that the church, who had been in many cases helping Biden along behind the scenes, Biden during the church commission basically abandons church and throws his whatever political weight there was behind Jimmy Carter against church, even though church had been kind of like a mentor to Joe Biden. And that just obviously illustrates the duplicity of him. That's how his name came up earlier in the show.
Well, that's pretty interesting. You mentioned that because Biden's basically been, the cover guy since day one. Remember, he was also the one who was on the committee which investigated MK Ultra.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's kind of been a cover-up guy since day one. But that's really interesting. Oh, by the way, speaking of Biden, Che Fang is under investigation now.
Explain to everybody who that is.
Remember, super boss, Hunter Biden's big pal. So a lot of people think when he talks about Patrick Ho, he's like the spy chief of China, the super director. It's not. It was actually a guy named Che Fang. And Che Fang was actually, let's just say, he married into basically the top tiers of the CCP intelligence apparatus, in particular his wife's uncle. But he basically became new intelligence chief within the CCP, and he was basically speaking directly with Hunter Biden. When they talk about like the director, that's who they're talking about. That's who Hunter Biden's talking about. It's Chefeng, Chefeng. And now there apparently is another investigation opening into him. So we'll see what comes from that.
I love it. Okay. Anybody else have anything that they want to bring up? Okay. Adam, go ahead.
I just wanted to tell you, Colonel, I put a few links in the pill if you want to check those out on Space Force. I found those articles like a while back about the outer net and one of the basically units dedicated to targeting adversary satellites.
Yeah.
Pretty cool stuff.
Well, and I say this often in general conversation outside of spaces, but probably not enough on spaces. The constellation that was set up for Starlink, there is, for every single Starlink out there, there is a section of Starlink that is dedicated to military use only. And that is now obviously an array around everything. So again, just with everything, you don't find out militarily what's going on for decades after it's gone on. That is true with just about every capability that we have. So thank you for putting that out there. Miles, go ahead.
Guys, I don't plan on going on a trip this summer. I'm going to enjoy the Minnesota summer. But when it starts to get cold, my sister lives just south of Tallahassee. So I may be going on a trip for the winter. And Colonel, Tallahassee's not that far from you.
It is not. It's about 4 hours from here.
Yeah, I would love to meet you. And then on my way back, there's lots of people I could meet and greet. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dante, go ahead.
Oh, no. So I just wanted to kind of I'll get to what Adam was talking about. I think, you talk about like low Earth orbit satellites, like that whole constellation. I think the actual Italy gate, like everything that transpired over in Rome here was actually the result of a blackmail operation, which was exposed. And that's why, everyone from, Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani were over here looking for, Miss Sood's phones. But that's a whole other thing. I'm not sure if you want to go into that.
Are you talking about the Italy with the guy in Germany and the vote counting over there?
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack from that. So before any of that happened, like back in 2018, one of the hackers who was arrested, I say hackers loosely because, so he had actually hacked Tinker Air Force Base back in 2006. Like that was real. We're talking about this guy named Arturo Delia. That was real. That happened. I spoke to his lawyer. And he was recruited by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations after that, the Air Force OSI. So they trained him at Quantico. So he was definitely one of ours.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and he worked for the CNAPIC, which was like the Italian Cyber Postal Police. They do like a lot of the digital forensics, etc. And while he was CNAPIC were actually caught, they were implicated in a lawsuit trying to plant DNC emails, which was a result of a Gucci firm, let's say exfiltration. They were caught trying to plant those emails on servers of an Italian family who basically lived in the U.S. They had servers for their called Westboro in West Virginia. And the reason they found out was because they had actually sued after basically going through hell and back. And they found out it was actually CNAPIC who was trying to plant these emails. Keep in mind, this was the same time CNAPIC was actually one of the first ones who had actually said that there was a Trump-Russiagate connection, because when you go back to 2014, 2015, 2016, Christine Poza, FBI Cyber, Tom Grasso, FBI Cyber. He was also Rodney Jaffe's longtime friend and handler. He was in Rome. Christina Poza was in Rome, down there with Bruce and Nellie Orr. All that's going on. As a matter of fact, Tom Grasso was actually, the reason we know he was in Rome is because he actually gave a cybersecurity speech down there in January of 2016, in which he discusses how he's the FBI cyber detachment liaison to the embassy in Rome. So I think that's probably what happened with Dele. It was a part of that, because one of the bosses who was intricately involved was actually on the phone with Vincenzo Scotti, who's like the president of Link Campus. And he's a former cop who is basically tied to a lot of the intelligence apparatus, which pushed for the Iraq invasion. They were also involved in what was called Manipulitio or Tangentopoli with Robert Mueller, and that was a few cases back in the early 90s. So there's this almost diametric connection to, the current U.S., let's say, deep state apparatus. And Benotti was actually on phone, he was actually on the phone talking about how he has wiretaps, how he has recorded conversations of all the bosses of Leonardo, which was known as Finmeccanica.
So, and let me just reemphasize something that came up a few shows ago, that all of the intelligence organizations, not intelligence, investigative elements, the OSI, the Navy's investigations, have at some point had CIA embedded in them. And just like you have general officers that are wearing a uniform but are being tasked by the CIA, That is true of the investigative arms of the services as well, because the CIA has decided in some situations wearing a uniform or being a part of the military allows them to operate in an environment that they otherwise wouldn't have access to, and also gives them a level of plausible deniability. And it goes back to how we started the space off, with them using the military and the generated American response to any attack on the military. And they use that to their advantage when necessary. And I'm not saying that the OSI wouldn't necessarily be involved in nefarious things themselves. I just want people to keep in mind that anything that any organization has generally in investigations and intelligence has had penetrations from the CIA.
Yeah, and that one surprised me, because if that was the case with Delia, because he was actually, he spent a lot of time in DC as well. As a matter of fact, one of his friends, one of the guys who worked for him over at CNAPIC, his nickname is Yarno. He's got a PhD in computer science. Anyway, he basically posted like photos of them flying around in like DC and Nova and like a Cessna 172, talking about like flight lessons and stuff like this. And this was like 2014 when he was working with Alcatel. He was also working with NATO, as well as doing contracting in with CNAPIC. And he was part of like the CERT team. And they officially went over to Leonardo, as well as did contracting for CNAPIC in like 2016, 2015, 2016. 2018, he had actually requested political asylum. And the lawyer we spoke to told us that. And then it just went silent. It was complete radio silence until December 5th of 2020, when the day he was arrested, he basically called him out of nowhere. He said, "Get over here to my house right now." And these guys were long-time friends. The lawyer's name is Damiano Cardiello, and his father, Franco Cardiello, is actually a very prominent senator. So he was very well connected. He was also a mayoral candidate down in Eboli, down south. And he lost because I guess he wasn't corrupt. Yeah, just so you know, there was a lot there, and that whole thing was just completely memory hold. But Leonardo,
do you know when he was a mayoral candidate in southern Italy?
Yeah, that was. I think the last time was 2020.
Okay,
it was right around the same time as the coup. And it's interesting too, because a lot of the information that came out from that was actually previously published. Like it's very well known that the St. Regis Hotel, right there next to the embassy in Rome, is a known hotspot. Like that's just ground zero for intelligence.
Yes, I've been there.
It's also kind of known for having an on-call service of traffic. Eastern European escorts, but that's the kind of place it was.
As a matter of fact, my friend that was stationed at the Rome embassy when I was in southern Italy took us to that and was telling us that was a well-known fact in the embassy, which is why they used it.
Correct. Yeah, it was. And Mancata, the boss over there at Fata SBA, you want to look at Gladio, you really need to look at that dude. He has like a top floor suite penthouse over there, with his own security detail constantly there, and he wheels and deals there all the time. It's just, and then of course, what do you have right across the street, right below it, next to that Leonardo facility? So you got a bank on the other side. You've got the recondite Leonardo facility, which is right across from the Guardia di Finanza. And what's in between there? that bank and Leonardo, you've got a Wall Street English. Now, what is Wall Street English? It's an ESL front for the CIA. If you guys ever see like those little ads, you'll see them online all the time looking for a ESL second language speaker, you know, some kind of hole in the wall place. Looks like it's kind of shuttered. Yeah, that's basically what that is.
I was going to say it had to be CIA.
Yeah, it's like the worst kept secret possible. And then you put it right between, you know, behind the Regis, next to Leonardo, in front of the Guardia di Finanza, and then next to, I think it was Monte de Paschi di Siena, actually, which is like the oldest dated Western bank. It's been around since like 1472. That's a whole nother mess right there. And you could talk about that with Renzi, you know, Hillary Clinton's pals, Gianni Patella and Jim Messina, who was Obama's campaign manager as well. It's a mess down there. But I literally, I think that's why they wanted to put such an absurd theory into investigating anything regarding Italy, just so that way it would be crushed, it'd be squashed. If you guys remember that piece of paper that was floating around, there was a guy's name on there. His name was Carlo Goria. So these guys, U.S. aerospace partners, going back before the election in June of 2020, they were actually bidding to buy Alitalia.
I remember that.
Yeah, and Alfio Dorso, the lawyer who's in that video, that really crappy video, he was actually the president of an airline or of an airport union down in Sicily. And he was helping them to get this bid for Alitalia. Now, Carlo Goria's uncle is the former prime minister of Italy, who was actually investigated and implicated in not only the P2 Masonic Lodge, but also with the Gladio revelations.
Yep.
From Andreotti.
Yep.
So, some crackpot from Georgia can't just conceive that whole storyline out of nowhere, especially when it was Telecom Italia who actually built the machines for Smartmatic back in 2004. Vista did the software, then they flew on over to Rome. They went to go talk to Olivetti Technos.
So,
and they
go ahead.
No, and I was just saying they got them to build 25,000 refurbished slot machines for voting in Venezuela. And this is in their 2004 annual fiscal report.
So let me put a bow on this. Obviously, Dante knows his shit. And for the Reader's Digest of everything that he was just saying, you guys know the way they do this. And this takes us right back to Kevin Shipp's book. What did he tell you? They will take actual information and factual information, and that will be some percentage of a story, enough to get people to buy into it, when the rest of the percentage of the story is made up shit. And they want you to come in with the truth part of it, and then you're going to step in the shit. And when you start walking back the story, you walk with the shit all over your feet back over the truth part of the story. So now the entire story's covered in shit, and everybody only takes away from the story the shit. And that's how they disguise in plain sight the truth, by telling a little bit of the truth and then wrapping the entire thing up in a shitball. And what Dante just revealed to you is exactly how they do that. And they did it with the whole election interference. And there's a ton of those tentacles where they did exactly that. Is that a fair assessment, Dante?
Yeah, that is a limited in a nutshell right there.
Yeah.
And and keep in mind, this was also going on. And the reason I think there's a blackmail angle here is because there was a blackmail angle before. So it turns out in 2006, after the Abu Omar scandal, when SISMI, which was the Italian intelligence agency at the time, was really under the microscope, it came out in a lawsuit, actually from two journalists who were blowing the whistle on the yellow cake forgeries, which were used to justify the invasion of Iraq, which were pushed by Nick Mari, who was the boss over at Forte de Broschi, which is like the Italian intelligence. It's like the Italian version of Langley.
Yeah.
And he was also really good friends with Giovanni De Gennaro and a guy named Tavaroli, who was the boss over at Telecom Italia. So it turns out Telecom Italia, through this lawsuit from these two journalists from L'Espresso, they found out that there was a massive spying scandal, eavesdropping scandal, which had been going on basically since like 1997 through 2005 to 2006. And they had actually tapped the phones of over 5,000 politicians. I'll tell you what, you'll be really hard pressed to find literature on this, especially in the English language. But it was called Operation Radar. And Telecom Italia was doing this the same time as they were also building out the Smartmatic machines. But one of the lead investigators, who again was from CNAPIC, his name was Adamo Bove. He was the lead investigator on this. He was also the lead witness for the prosecution. That was until they found his car on the side of a bridge and him about 17 meters below in a ravine.
Oh, gosh, like they did to Nugent down in Australia, or Calvi, or any of the others that they take out.
Yeah, and then, you fast forward a few more years, Tavaroli's other friend, who was a chief security officer at Telecom Italia, a guy named Emanuele Nizza, I believe his name was, he just takes a flight off the top of TIM headquarters down there in Rome.
Yeah. Like, who was it? Was it Calvi's secretary or his vice that did that when they killed Calvi on the Friars Bridge in London? One of them ended up out a window.
I think it was the secretary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's crazy too, is 6 months before Alessandro Profumo, or basically, so Alessandro Profumo, before he took over at Leonardo. Oh, and by the way, Giovanni De Gennaro is also the president of the Center for American Studies in Rome. Take a guess what that is.
CIA.
It is.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, so, basically, the De Gennaro was, and there's a photo of him in 2006 standing there next to Bob Mueller getting the CIA Medal of Recognition or whatever for the Tangentopoli investigation. De Gennaro was actually stationed in New York during Tangentopoli during the early 90s. And that wasn't to remove the mafia writ large. That was to get the old families out and make way for the new ones.
Everything that they say they're doing to rid us of something is ridding us of competition to them.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a reason. The Gladio revelations were under Andreotti, and that was what I believe 1990.
1990, August 2nd, 1990. I know, it was my first day in Italy. Yep.
So that came out, and then all of a sudden, you fast forward to, 91, 92, and 93, you get all this anti-mafia activity, and the two judges who are killed in rather questionable circumstances, and they blame it on the mafia. And naturally, they blame it on the old families. And what do they do? The FBI, we're opening up a new task force. And what does that do? It wipes out a lot of, the old apparatus. But, the apparatus over in Chicago survived. The outfit over there. Remember Meyer Lansky and the Jewish Mafia of Chicago were the ones who basically placed the doormat for the Allies during Operation Husky in World War II. They were. So it's some really, really interesting stuff. And again, I think they threw the 2020 election stuff on it. And again, when we talked to the lawyer, what he told us was very interesting. and these are his words verbatim, obviously translated. But what he had told us is he didn't even know that there was any inference of election fraud. So basically, on 2 December 2020, an article appears in La Verità magazine, which was planted by a journal named Daniele Capezzone. Rumor has it that the source for this article came from inside the Vatican, but it talks about an electoral election fraud, which had actually happened. And this was in 2 December 2020. Fast forward to 5 December 2020. Delia is basically arrested. The lawyer's called up. 10 days later, after the lawyer basically didn't hear from him for basically 9.5 days, the guy calls him, tells Damiano, the original lawyer, that he's been replaced by this piece of shit dirtbag named Nappaniello. This guy is a scum of the earth. He's represented mafia, everything. He's as bad as they get. And for some, I think they pressured the family into firing Damiano personally, but
you're blanking out, Dante.
he's been fired after 10 days. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay.
So the lawyer is replaced, and it's your summation that the family was pressured to hire the mafia lawyer in order to mitigate any damage that the guy may generate.
Oh yeah, pretty much. And then Delia went to jail, and almost as soon as he was out of jail, they were parading around Arturo Delia in a Guy Fawkes mask on Italian TV. And what's the one thing they talked about? The only thing that they had asked him about, again, this is going to your point of disqualification. All they had talked about was the election fraud. As a matter of fact, they actually pulled up messages from Garrett Ziegler to Arturo's girlfriend. Her name was Concetta Giglio. They actually gotten a hold of her to say, hey, what the hell's going on? If this is real, talk to us, because Garrett was still in the White House at the time. Lo and behold, nothing came of it, basically. He ended up, him and Rossi, who is still in jail, by the way, he's been completely disappeared, like freaking key thrown away. Who was the leader of the CERT team over at Leonardo, he was, he just completely disappeared. No one even knows where he is, what he's doing, nothing. But the day after Arturo was out of jail, they're parading him around on national TV wearing a freaking Guy Fawkes mask, as if people haven't seen his face or his picture. And the only thing they talk about is his denial of the 2020 election fraud. But they don't talk about the fact that, according to his lawyer, he didn't even work close to the Pomigliano facility, which they allege he had siphoned information from, extracted information from. And what we learned was that he was working 200 kilometers away at a top secret Leonardo security operations center. And he was working on this supercomputer. And he was practicing exfiltration modeled with this supercomputer capacity. And they were using this in concert with the low Earth orbit satellite constellation that they were controlling at Telespazio in Fucino, which is the main station. And so when I hear Maria Zach pop up there talking about they were using it controlling satellites from a place called Fucino, I'm just like, what? This chick makes none of what she was saying was making sense, but she can't just create this. This came from somewhere.
Correct.
And
yeah, she was fed the disinformation, or the shit pile, as I call it.
So, interesting fact, actually, she is apparently, so you remember the whole thing we were talking about in Georgia
Yeah, with Jaffe.
No, not with Jaffe.
Oh.
With, Cobb County.
Oh, Cobb County. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, apparently she has a rather close connection to some of the people involved in that as well. People who run in circles with, say, like L. Todd Wood. Some of those guys, so.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, Todd Wood was one of her biggest defenders, like staunchest defenders, you know. He was basically the only one who had actually managed to get in contact with her, and like, of course, he had her on his show to do like an interview. And
did she show her face?
Yeah, she did.
Huh? Because I know most of the ones that she was on, she wouldn't show her face.
No, she showed her face on that one. I mean, her photo, basically, the first photo appears on the GRA website, like, no, not GRA, sorry, Cobb County GOP website in like 2022. That's when she first had her first photo on there. And, you know, after that, she just, you know, for someone who claimed to be a Delta and Walmart exec, she sure as shit had no footprint at all. There was nothing there.
That's interesting.
Nothing. As when you look at it from a digital forensic standpoint, it was sanitized. Her stuff was being sanitized, and it's interesting too because now it turns out that the Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami, which basically her family is the founders of,
right.
They were just in Atlanta over at the West End meeting with representatives from the Carter Center to discuss the next elections over in Bangladesh.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah, they were actually, so Jamaat-e-Islami is a designated terrorist organization in freaking Dubai. That's how bad these dudes are.
That's crazy.
And they're over in Atlanta meeting with the Carter Center. But sure, nothing to see here, right?
On quote-unquote election integrity. Oh, my God. That's crazy.
Well, yeah, it's pretty wild. But, I mean, when you look at it, too, it's, you know, there's a little bit more with that. Hold on, give me a sec.
Just
he's stepping away. I just wanted to vote that Fergie needs to be hired for your schedule coordinator. And she's reminding you you're going to be on in a not very long time. Doesn't want you to lose your voice.
Oh,
and,
shoot.
You may want it on news treason.
Okay, it's already 6:30. I'm sorry, guys, but
Yep.
Dante, you're going to have to come back tomorrow. I do have to run.
No, ma'am, not tomorrow.
Okay.
Wednesdays are no go for me. Thursday, I have a conference call I can't miss.
Okay.
I'll get with you offline about it.
Okay. Because I do have to log on to News Treason's show in 15 minutes, and I haven't ate dinner. So, Fergie,
Right.
Thank you. You're hired as my schedule coordinator. I will be on News Treason Dave's show at 7. And Fergie's right. I need to protect my voice because I have like 4 shows tomorrow. So, Adam, real quick, whatever you got to say, and then I got to run.
I just wanted to tell everyone to like and repost the space if you haven't already. This is a great conversation, and you know it's some of the most least biased, you know, straight up truth spaces that I definitely enjoy. And yeah, guys, like and repost it. People can re-listen to the space, and also follow Colonel Towner on Rumble and all other platforms that she's on. A wealth of knowledge, to say the least. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And Jester of Nice, I got to say this. The Colonel, he doesn't realize I don't watch television, so I have no idea what he's saying, but I think it's hilarious. The Colonel is turning into Mr. Leahy from Trailer Park Boys with the spectacular shit analogies.
They're all shitbirds, Julian. They're all shitbirds.
Okay, I love it. I love you guys. So thank you all for being here. And hopefully y'all can go grab something to eat and come back at 7. And I just want to say, I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. Y'all blew New Treason Dave away the last time I was on his show, because y'all all showed up in force and were just dominating his chat. We literally blew him away. He texted me afterwards and he was like, oh my gosh. So let's do it again. Let's do it again. Love you guys. Take care. And I'll be back here tomorrow. And
Bon appetito.
Thank you,
Where's
Dante.
News-
Thank you very much.
Where's News Treason? Where can we see News Treason?
He's on Rumble. It's called News Treason on his Rumble page. SR71 or Bridget will post it on my page on X for you guys. So you'll have a link. So I will repost it if he sends it to me. Take care, guys. Or you can just go to News Treason. He has an X account and he posts like a little thumbnail of the shows coming up. So anyway, God bless everybody. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye. All right, guys, I got to run. Got to go grab something to eat. Take care. Thank you, Fergie.